So I've gone and bought my first analog synthesizer, and the reason being is not to just have an analog synthesizer, but I wanted to see what it would do to my workflow. I've always worked with sounds that I've got inside of my computer, whether it be sample libraries or software synthesizers and things of that nature. I haven't had the chance to work with analog synthesizers yet, and I know for me, I would have to commit to a specific sound that I've dialed in before moving on. When it comes to the software instruments that I've worked with, I was always able to go back and make adjustments that I felt like I wanted, but not necessarily needed. And it really made my workflow a lot slower, which isn't something that I like, but I also like being able to go back and make the changes that I feel like are necessary. So I'm gonna go ahead and open Ableton up and we can start digging into what my session looks like now. So here's my session so far. It's really short, just under 2 minutes. I have a couple drum kits, this riser, which is the only other track that isn't from the Minitaur, and then I have a melody, I have a bass line, I have some accents that contribute to a build-up that I've got, a lead, and this little background lead accent thingy. You'll hear it. Anyways, so I first started off with this drum line, and I saved this drum line from a really long time ago, and the line sounds like this. And then later, this is basically the same drum line, just with no filters and an actual snare instead of a side stick. And lots of reverb to make it a bit more dramatic. The way that I had routed my Minitaur is that I used an external instrument plugin that's built into Ableton. After that, I just created a few chords and I slapped on an arpeggiator. And then after that, I spent some time dialing in the tone that I wanted on the Minitaur. After that, all I had to do was just print it to audio. Also, yes, I'm flipping back and forth between the working session and the session that's completed, since I don't really tend to mix too much as I'm composing or writing or any of that. I go back and mix or do the final mix later on. After I've got that to audio, I've gone ahead and added some effects. The first thing I wanted to do was roll off some bottom end off of that, since I'm going to bring in a bass later on. After that, I brought in a rack. I've left the dry signal in and then added a delay. This is the H delay. I have it playing 8th notes at the session's BPM 148. with maybe not so much feedback. I'm also feeding the delay into some reverb as well. I also have 2 other long reverbs fed into the rack. I have an H verb going on here with a long tail, as well as an R verb. After I've added my effects, I duplicated the track entirely and rose the second track an entire octave up. Then I've gone ahead and panned these left and right slightly, and altogether it sounds like this. So next up, I've got my bass tone being dialed in and recorded here. So this is probably the first thing that I wish I could go back and change as far as the notation goes. I think I really could have made the bass sound a bit more interesting and stand out a little bit more than it does. But since it's printed to audio, I can't go back and change it. With the bass, I did sort of the same thing. I went and duplicated the track, and then for the first track, which is my bass low, I set it to mono using the Ableton utility plugin, And then I've also rolled off most of the top end starting at 400 hertz. And then for the top end, I did pretty much the opposite. I rolled off most of the bottom end, not completely. I know it's a little cliche. I added the sausage fattener just so I could get in a little more distortion and some of those overtones. And then I also used the wider plugin from Polyverse and Infected Mushroom. And together, it all sounds like this. Now I've got the main structure of the song done with all its parts. All that's left is a lead. I've got this written out, and I wanted to do something with the glide function of the Minitaur. So for the lead, I basically did the same thing over again. I duplicated the audio, and I've taken one and tuned it up an octave, low being on the left ear just slightly and the high part being on the right ear just slightly. And then I grouped them. I added a little compression with the RVox, and then I added this saturation plugin called RC20, which I really love. I turned the noise, digital space, magnetic all off. For the most part, I always come to this plugin for the wobble and the distortion. I geared this more towards the flutter. And then for the distortion, I really like the air setting on this, and I added a bit. For the most part, I left the whole EQ section alone. And then I added the audio effect rack that I basically used on everything. And then together, it all sounds like this. After that, I wanted to create something to help build and lead up to the big part of the song. I used the same three notes and the idea from the lead. As far as the effects go, I used this audio effects rack with the dry signal as well as the H delay that I've used several times. I have this R comp for the distortion and the big space reverb-like thing that I really like. I also have a little bit of filtering going on. And you may have noticed before, I have this endless smile effect on a few other tracks just to help contribute to a build-up. And then after I added all of these plugins, I went ahead and printed it out to audio just so I can control the tail of the reverb that was on there. On its own, it sounds like this. One thing I like to do is have two leads with separate sounds of their own, so I can have like a dueling lead type thing going on. So finally, for this lead accent that I've created, I took all of the audio and I tuned it up a whole octave. After that, I split the audio down the middle and added some fade so it would swell in and out as the main lead part played. I wanted the accent to come in only when the main lead was finished with its little line. Then the accent would come in and basically kind of have this in and out motion between the two parts. For the plugins, I use the RVox, and then I use the same audio effects rack minus the delay, and then I also have a wider on here as well. And on its own, it sounds like this. All right, so I think I'm going to call that done. I'm not going to really go any further than this. If I were to go further, I would probably end up using other instruments than this one. However, I feel like I got what I wanted out of this. So let's go ahead and take a listen. So the Minitaur is actually pretty versatile, although it does take a bit of effects processing to get the sounds that I really wanted. I would still recommend getting an analog synthesizer just because it is a lot of fun to use and it does make you work a lot differently than you would if you were using a software synth. Anyways, please subscribe, leave a comment, and like the video, all that YouTube bullshit. See ya!